Hi everybody, good morning. Thank you very much for coming out. Welcome to the Peconic Estuary Program Call to Action Conference for 2015. I'm Cheryl Jones, Outreach and Education Coordinator for Peconic Estuary Program. Just wanted to make a few announcements quickly before we get started. First of all, there are Wi-Fi cards on your table if you are looking to connect with the wireless internet. There is information there as far as the password and network name, so you can use those. Just to let you know too, there's no break scheduled within the agenda. So if you need to get up, move around, help yourself to some refreshment, please feel free to do so at any time. You might find some postcards, hopefully, in your registration packet. We're going to ask you to write down any questions that you have for each panel on those, and then pass them sort of orderly to the end of your tables, and or just sort of put them up in the air and we'll come collect them from you. The Q&A session for the panels we'd like to keep kind of orderly, so we're going to do it in this fashion rather than raising your hands. We hope that to get to everybody's questions. If we can't, we apologize and appreciate your understanding, but we're going to do it in that way. Thank you. There's also some fertilizer surveys within your packet. If you live within the Peconic Estuary watershed, we ask that you fill that out. We're trying to collect some data to understand people's fertilizer use in their own homes. If you're not sure if you live within the estuary watershed, please either ask myself or one of the PEP staff members, and certainly at the registration desk we can help you determine that. If you feel like you'd like to participate, you can leave them either on the Peconic Estuary Program table, information table over there, or at the registration desk as well. Following the morning session, there'll be the afternoon site tour over to the Riverhead Sewer District. If you are not familiar with where that is, there are directions on the back of your program. And again, if you have any questions, please ask at the registration desk or one of us. Just also wanted to thank quickly Bridgehampton National Bank for sponsoring the refreshments for this event. And also a very warm thank you to the presenters and speakers who will be here today and volunteering their time. Venue also asked me to just have you be mindful of when you leave. There will be another event happening in the room next to us, and so we ask if you just keep your voices down. We can be not as very disruptive to them, and that's it. So this is National Estuaries Week. Around the country, all estuaries of national significance are celebrating our coast, and so we ask that you participate online and social media, and follow Peconic Estuary on Facebook and Twitter, and sort of repost and retweet the things that we're posting, and we can get as much information out there as possible to people. Without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Allison Branco, who is the Peconic Estuary Program Director. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many people here. Thank you for joining us. So, as Cheryl said, my name is Allison Branco. I'm the Program Director for the Peconic Estuary Program. Before I say my introductory remarks, I just want to give a big, giant thank you to our Public Education and Outreach team from Cornell Cooperative Extension. They've been doing an amazing job this year on our outreach, helping you all find out about the program and participate in events like this. So, can we all just give them a hand for planning a great event? In addition to Cheryl, who you just heard, there's Christy, there's Scott, and there's Matt, and Rory with the camera and the video in your face for the whole day. So please thank them if you get a chance. So I want everybody to think back a ways back into the 80s when everyone had big hair and funny clothes and bad music. And remember, those of you who were around on Long Island at the time, the Peconic Estuary was suffering from some really horrendous brown tides, and the scallop fishery was crashing. And that's what really brought about the creation of the Peconic Estuary Program. And it was not the federal government coming in and saying, you have a problem and we want to fix it. It was people like all of you in this room, regular citizens, local government officials, civic organizations that were concerned about what they were seeing, about their livelihoods, about the places that they like to swim and fish and things like that, coming together and demanding some help from the government to address these serious problems that they were seeing in their own backyard. And so I want to sort of set that as the stage for how this program began and sort of the spirit that I think we need to get back to in our East End region to fix the problems that we're seeing now. So back in the 80s, there was a lot of lobbying done citizens, a real grassroots effort with the help of local governments, towns and the county, pushing the state and the federal government to include the Peconic Estuary in the National Estuary Program. So the National Estuary Program is a federal program funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. There are 28 programs like us around the country. And so the Peconic Estuary in 1992 was designated an estuary of national significance. So that meant that basically the whole country recognized that what everyone here already knew, that this estuary was very special and it was in trouble and we needed to save it before it was too late. So with the designation as an estuary of national significance and the inclusion in that program, it meant a bunch of federal funding to help our region come together and create sort of a consensus about what needed to be done to address the water quality and habitat issues that were happening. So that happened, and that document is called the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. It was started then in the mid-90s and finished in 2001. And it laid out 300 and some odd actions that needed to be accomplished to protect and preserve water quality. And since then, a lot of great stuff has been done. A lot of those boxes have been ticked, and a lot of programs have been sort of set underway. Some of the really big highlights, obviously everyone here knows that local governments have done a spectacular job preserving open space. All of the sewage treatment plants have been upgraded to reduce wastewater inputs to the estuary. We have pump out boats now. All kinds of great work has been done, habitat restoration projects. But there's a lot more left to be done, a lot of work not yet done, and a lot of new things that we have learned we need to do. And a lot of things that are a bit outdated now. We don't have raging brown tides, thank goodness. I always knock on wood when I say that, in the Peconic Estuary. So there's a lot to be updated. And so this coming year, our program is going to set out to update that Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. And the purpose of doing that is not to have a more up-to-date, big, fat document that everyone can use as a paperweight, but it's to bring the region together again, to rebuild that consensus and bring the citizens and the businesses and the local governments, the fishermen, the people who like to swim, everyone who's affected by and affecting the estuary together to rebuild that consensus about what needs to be done to protect our water, and what is the path forward to do that. And that's because we're sort of in some ways right back where we were in the 80s. So a lot of great things have been done and a lot of improvements have been seen. And we did the best we could with the information that we had 20 some odd years ago. But what we found is that all that great stuff we did, while it was good, it wasn't enough. And so what we need to do now is fix the new problems and the ongoing problems that we have. So we have a whole rainbow of harmful algal blooms. Everyone knows it's the end of summer, and that's all we've been hearing about for months now. Red tide, rust tide, brown tide, green tide, blue, everything. Some of those are harmful to organisms, some of them are harmful to people, some of them you can't eat shellfish when they're around, some of them you can't swim when they're around. Not a good thing. All fueled by basically the pollution caused by all of us living here. We have hypoxia. That's when the oxygen in the water column is too low for the critters to breathe. We also saw a very terrible fish kill earlier this summer in the western Peconic and in the Peconic River. Also fueled in part by nitrogen loading. We're losing our wetlands and our seagrasses. And the best uses of our estuary, the fishing and the swimming and the things that we love about living here and looking out at the water, are becoming degraded or continuing to be degraded. So we've learned a lot since that CCMP was first written about how the system works and what needs to be done. So the time is here to kind of set that path forward, to be grateful for what we've done, but to look ahead and figure out now what are the next things that we need to do. We've sort of tackled some of the problems that were easier to address because they were permitted or regulated or more simple in a regulatory way. And now what we have left is a lot of really hard work. Diffuse, what we call non-point sources, not a pipe flushing pollution out into the estuary, but just a little bit all around going into our groundwater. So it's going to be a complicated problem to address. It's going to require all levels of government as well as all the other stakeholders in the estuary to come together and really commit to doing it at whatever cost and whatever time and really get it done and do it right so that we can protect the place that we all love. So What our program's role is in all of that is to sort of bring the people together. So we have a lot of different local governments, and some of them are really enthusiastic about working on these problems. But what we need to do is bring the region together to build that consensus, like I said. So what our program has done, we've written something we call an action plan. So that sort of lays out a few short-term actions to get us started on the right path. You should have found on your table a sort of summary of that action plan. And at the bottom of that, there's a link to go to our website, and you can find the whole document, which is a big series of actions that, if time and money were unlimited, we would all get started on and do right now. We know that time and money are not unlimited, but this is sort of a set of actions that are our top priorities, and that when there are funding opportunities available, we will seek them to do those actions. And this is still a working draft at this point. We're very much interested in hearing feedback from everyone, citizens, businesses, local government officials, everyone. So please either call or email or talk to us today and provide some feedback. Go now or later when you go home and read the whole document. We're very much interested in that. And then from that short-term set of actions, we will create this broader, comprehensive conservation and management plan revision, sort of a new version of it. And that process is going to involve everyone. So please join us. There will be meetings, there will be workshops, there will be websites, there will be a million opportunities for all of you to participate in that process. And it's really critical that everyone does, because the term comprehensive is really serious, and we do want this document to sort of lay the path forward for all of us in the Peconic region to protecting our water quality. So we hope that you will work with us to get that done, and then to implement all of the actions that we come up with when we do that. And lastly, today you're going to learn about a lot of different ways that you can help the estuary as a resident, at your own home, in your community, with your civic group, as a voter. And we hope that you will do all of those things and participate with our program, and hopefully some of what you'll hear about today will inspire you and give you some great ideas of things that you can go out and do in the next few years to do your part to protect the estuary. So I welcome everybody today. I think we're going to have a really great program. We have a lot of interesting people to hear from and talk to. So write down those important questions that you have, and I look forward to our day today. Thanks for coming.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin McDonald. I'm the CAC chair, and I've been involved in water quality issues for the last few years. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Bob DeLuca, president of Group for the East End. And I've known Bob for close to almost 30 years. He leads an organization that advocates at the grassroots and community-based level for necessary change in public policy as it affects the environment on the East End. They do that work, I think, with good information, determination, and persistence. So when we were thinking about what might a proper way to begin the discussion that citizens and their government should have about making the changes necessary to recover water quality and habitat, a few reflections on Bob's experience, both as an adjunct professor at LIU and then as an individual who's run an organization that does just that, made the most sense to a few of us. So I think we would appreciate Bob's insight on how the public actually wins occasionally, and how the public actually sometimes has to inspire its leadership in the government arena to do the work that the public demands. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Bob DeLuca. And Bob, please say a few words for us to get started. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks very much. Kevin asked me to come in and have a call to action here, but you're already here, so we can probably wrap it up and just get the bagels. I wanted to, wouldn't be a good environmentalist if I didn't start with a good Gandhi quote, right? So Gandhi has this quote that says, when the people lead, the leaders follow, right? And you've all heard that, and a lot of people find that to be sort of critical of government, and I'm going to make the opposite argument. I actually think it should inspire us and our government leadership, because that's what a representative democracy is supposed to do. I don't necessarily want government running off and doing whatever it thinks should be done in the absence of the public having an opinion about it. So when you look at a program like this, and you look at how far we've come, and you look at how long it's taken to get here, a driving component of that has always been the people putting pressure on the elected officials and raising issues to an elevated point where it makes sense to elected officials to jump in and do the right thing. And we live in a region where that's happened. So we've had a balance of very good public officials who've been interested, who've been concerned, who have picked up the call to action and taken it. And we've got a bunch of people at the same time who keep showing up year after year, now 30 years in, to deal with this issue. And I want to take you kind of quickly through the history of this entire program, which I think may have started in our office, and Kevin can correct me if I'm wrong, but in 1985, after the first big and horrible bloom of brown tide in the Peconics, I remember being in then Group for the South Forks office, my first job out of grad school, and Gene Lane and Gene Mariner came into the office and basically sat us down and said, "What are you doing about this?" And it was like, a week after it happened. So if you're in government, never think you're the only guys that get those phone calls. So they came in, sat down, and said, "What are you doing about this?" We started talking about it. And before you know it, there was something that some of you may still remember called the Bay Emergency Action Coalition, the Beach Coalition. And essentially it was just that. It was a agglomeration of civic people and some business people and some elected officials. And the idea was we had to get our arms around this problem quickly because it turned out it wasn't going away. 85, 86, 87, those blooms decimated, in the true sense of the word, the entire scallop population from $500,000, I'm sure, in revenue down to like $50 3 years later. And it woke everybody up. But what was going to happen about it, there was no rule that said we had to do anything different than we were doing. So the Bay Emergency Action Coalition essentially went to Suffolk County. The Suffolk County Legislature noticed, paid attention. Before we knew it, we're underway with basically what was called the Brown Tide Comprehensive Assessment and Management Plan, the BT Camp Study. Suffolk County Health Department took the lead on that, and between, let's say, 1988 and 1992, that study for the first time began to look at the Peconic Estuary as a regional resource, a lot of water quality data, a lot of assessment. We didn't solve the brown tide mystery, but it was a galvanizing point around which the county began to get more and more invested. By 1992, the BT Camp Study is out. There's data talking about the issues facing the estuary. That study ends up becoming the nomination document in large part for the National Estuary Program designation in 92 and 93. And by the end of 93 or thereabouts, the program is in the National Estuary Federal Program. And after that, 8 years later, we get the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan that Allison mentioned before. Great. So how did all of that happen? It happened through a series of steps that basically are required in any major policy or social change. There's a guy who was a fellow at Harvard at the Kennedy School, and his name is Daniel Yankolovich. And essentially what he did is he tried to look at how social change happens and how it works. And he came up with 7 steps. And I want to give you those 7 steps because whether it's the Peconic Estuary Program or any other thing you want to get done, public consciousness moves in an evolutionary way. Yankolovich was looking at this because he said politicians were making the mistake of looking at political opinion at points in time and not realizing there was an evolutionary process. And it's the same with all public policy. So many of you in this room are familiar with the concept of dawning awareness. Well, the brown tide hit us, like a sledgehammer. And in that case, the dawning awareness went from like 0 to blast level in a matter of minutes. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it takes a long time to get that point across. But that dawning awareness is the first step in this process. And the public has a very narrow bandwidth for this kind of information. If you think about all the things that the average person goes through on a daily basis, from picking up their kids and going shopping and worrying about whether the plumber is coming, to all of those things that fill up our space, the idea of looking at water quality data and analysis on brown tide is a really, really small space, even for the most caring individual. So you have to be careful about, all of us in this room have a much broader understanding of this than the average person, and that needs to get elevated. And it is the public that is frequently most involved in that process. Government's got plenty of things to do. It's not walking around all the time handing out brochures and talking to people about these issues. So when that awareness starts to permeate through culture, there is then this urgency that has to take place. If it's not urgent, there's a million things we could think about. The urgency is, again, a primary role for the public or advocacy organizations. What's urgent? Of the 50 million things elected officials could do that are all necessary, which are the most urgent? Which are the priorities? That development of setting priorities falls almost all the time to the public or the public's organizations or community groups who raise those issues before their elected officials. And if they do it in unison and they do it often enough, the urgency begins to percolate up. And I want to point out, I think it's really important to remember that if every idea or thought drove government in a different direction, if you think it's troubling now, try to imagine what that would look like. So it's not so bad that it takes us a little while to get our legs underneath us and get the story told. And once you set those priorities, you then move into this choices, identifying choices. What can be done? And then there's a whole range of things that could be done. You look at the Peconic Estuary, there's 150 different recommendations in that study, and that's narrowing it down probably from 2,000. Soon as you come up with what can be done, there's an automatic response in the general public and among elected officials, which is called resistance. Resistance is not always a bad thing. And I want to give you a sort of a sidebar analogy. You can imagine our Paleolithic ancestors, and some guy is chasing around a Paleolithic ground squirrel for 15 hours, and like the squirrels in your backyard, he can't outwit it, lays there exhausted, sits down, and a mammoth walks by. And in that moment, he says to himself, one mammoth, just one mammoth. I could sit down, I could eat, I could have fur, I could have all this kind of stuff. And he goes and he tells the guy next to him, and he says, I think we should give up on the ground squirrels and maybe go for the mammoth. The guy next to him says, look at the size of the stick that you used to get that squirrel. Look at the size of that mammoth. And there begins the resistance. And the resistance comes up with all the different things that people tell you why you can't get anything done. And it's not bad, because you don't fix the stick, you're never going to get the mammoth. So some of the stuff that comes up in resistance is necessary, and some of it is just we don't like the change. We like ground squirrels. I like chasing squirrels. I don't like the mammoth. Whatever it is, the same thing applies every single time you try to make change. People say, septic waste. It's going to cost $100 billion, we're never going to do it. Way too much money. You're never going to raise that kind of money. I remember, and there are people in this room that remember, the Community Preservation Fund, now lionized as the greatest environmental protection effort probably in the region's history. I stood at hearings where elected officials said it was illegal, it was immoral, there would never be another piece of real estate ever sold on the East End again, and real estate values would plummet the day this thing was approved. Now, you can't find any of those people anymore, but I assure you they were there. And they were resistance. It was new, it was different. And to overcome resistance, you need a mob of people to come in and say, not so fast. Maybe we should try. Maybe it's worth trying. Maybe try a little bit. Maybe do it this way. Maybe do it that way. And eventually, out of that, you get to the weighing of the real choices. At some point along this continuum, there will be 4 or 5 decisions that get made. What does the Community Preservation Plan really give us? What does that program look like? What did the Pine Barrens Protection Act look like writ large? Those are the decisions that sort of narrow the focus, right? And then the public takes a stand on those intellectually. Like, we look at these options, we go through the resistance, we say all the things we want to say, we get it off our chest, and we narrow and narrow and narrow. And every step along the way, there is an advocacy organization or a civic group or an individual or a group of individuals or a business organization that is engaged in that process vigorously, saying, no, you have to look at this and not that, and we can find the money, and this will really work. And it sort of forces this, it's like, narrowing it into a funnel. And then at some point, the public says, I get it. We've talked about this with water quality here with great frequency. Lately, the water quality issue is extremely serious and it's extremely large. But we don't have to convince anybody that it's real anymore. And I would argue that this program, along with others, South Shore Estuary, Long Island Sound Study, have made that convincing much easier. And the public, by and large, you can read the newspapers, you can do the polling, intellectually gets it. It's broken and we got to fix it. The final part of this process, and it's the part where the rubber really hits the road, is a moral and ethical commitment at the end. And that moral and ethical commitment gives you what my wife, the psychotherapist, calls a fixed belief. Now, you can have a dangerously wrong fixed belief, or you can have a good fixed belief, but it's fixed nonetheless. And once it is fixed and cemented emotionally and morally, you're on the path to success. So that piece comes from each one of you talking to a neighbor, a friend, a family member, a newspaper editor, whoever it is, and they look you in the eye, and when you really believe it, they start to believe it. Even if they've just taken an intellectual stand. You go to a newspaper editor, he says, okay, look, there's points on all sides here. Give me your spiel. You tell them what it is, and there's always a personal assessment. We make it all the time. We listen to people, we look at people. That's the piece that government isn't even allowed to do, much less that we should put it on their back to do. So the reason I tell you all of this is that each and every step along the path of getting this estuary plan done is no different than the path that was taken to get the Pine Barrens Act done, the Community Preservation Fund, the massive upzonings that were done in the 80s, and everything that comes to pass from this day forward. All change is a ramp, and each of you is somewhere on that ramp, and you don't even need to know where you are exactly. Somebody might be there when there's a huge thing that happens, and you'll be remembered forever. Somebody might be there when you're just protecting your flank and keeping the thing alive. But at the end of the day, if you see all change as that ramp, your role on that ramp, and your obligation to make this system of representative government work, come hell or high water, you keep participating, you keep showing up, you keep beating the drum, eventually the world around you begins to shift and change. And this guy, who's much smarter than me, figured this out for the purpose of political campaigns, but it works in every bit of human life as well. If you think about, even in your own life, what becomes urgent, what becomes a priority, how do you decide to do things? That's the piece that the public owns. That's the piece that's intrinsic within each and every one of us. That's the power that we have, no matter how much money we have or we don't have. It's one-to-one talking to people and having them go, you know what, I think we could do it. And when it comes to the Peconics, I've been banging away at this, as Kevin said, 30 years or more. And you might think after those 30 years that you get to the point where you say, well, if it's not fixed now, I guess it's just not going to get fixed. But I would encourage you to think about, those of you who can remember, and I'll set aside the comment about bad clothes and 80s music, which I have taken a long time to get over. But a tremendous amount has been done. You can't change the world overnight. It shouldn't change overnight. If it did change overnight, things would be worse than they are. But the obligation is to continue to press forward and press along. And the more you press along and the more you engage and the more you participate, the easier it is for good leaders to lead, the easier it is for funding to flow, the better resources you have over time, and the better outcomes you achieve as a result of all of those things coming together. So as we start this conference, I guess I would just say this, welcome aboard, or thanks for staying along for the ride. It is a long race. It has been a great run that we have had, and never ever underestimate how far we can go based on the continued process of human investment and the governmental outcomes that we require to make this work. So with that, I'll just say thank you very much, and encourage you all to enjoy what comes next.